Hello, everyone, and welcome to another New Year, New Language Summit session. And in this session, I'm joined by Martha Summerlin, who's the host of the I'm Learning podcast, which is for introverted and shy language learners everywhere. And in the summit, she's going to be talking about aligning personality and practice, a path to consistent progress. So we'll be going through kind of aligning yourself with your personality when it comes to language learning, the nuances of introversion, extroversion, shyness, social anxiety, and basically try to make your language learning as sustainable as it can be. So enjoy this conversation between me and Martha, and I'll see you in a future New Year, New Language Summit session. All right, everyone, welcome back to another New Year, New Language Summit session. And here I'm joined by Martha Summerlin. Welcome, Martha.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. You're one of the new speakers, as we just discussed in the pre recording. So it's good to have some fresh faces around here. And can you just let everyone know where you're from and what your background in language learning is and how you started the podcast?
Sure. So I am from North Carolina in the US. I have very strong roots here, so I have to say that I am not from the Carolinas. Like people all the time, they're like, I met someone from the Carolinas. No, you didn't. You met someone from one of the Carolinas. Like we've not been the Carolinas for like a couple hundred years now. So it may not bother everyone. It bothers me. So I just have to say that. I live in Raleigh, which actually is a really cool place for language learning. Every time people come here and they're like, oh, everything is like so English, so white, so this and that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because it's like we have so many native Spanish speakers, so many people from India. We have so many people from the Middle East. We have right by my university, there's all these Arab stores you can go in. Some of them even have the signs in Arabic and English. You have Japan is becoming even more important, a Japanese American society. You have just so many languages. We're not in New York City, obviously, far from it, but it's like so cool to go and just hear these different languages and see these different people. And I swear my husband and I cannot go shopping without hearing Brazilian Portuguese. Like it happens every single time. So so it's a really cool place. As far as languages, I've really been into them for absolutely forever. I always say it dates back to my parents being from different dialects of North Carolina. My mom's from Appalachia, my dad's from Eastern North Carolina, where I'm from. But I had to start learning Spanish when I was in third grade, all through school. And they told us, like, so many more Spanish speakers are coming here. It's very important. You need to learn it. And so in rural North Carolina, that's what we did. That's where it started. And then Portuguese came along when I was 15, Hebrew and Arabic when I was in college. And then from there, it's just, I can't stop. I'm addicted. Right now, it's Japanese and Irish. So we'll see where it goes. I do have a podcast called I'm Learning, which was the name was kind of inspired from people telling me I was studying too much. I I am autistic, so languages are my main special interest. They help me regulate myself, they help me feel good. And so don't take languages away from me. It's not going to be pretty. And I didn't know I was autistic though at the time when I started the podcast. And so I started it as a space for I say like the quieter people to come and learn about language learning from a different, more sort of holistic perspective. And the first season is all about kind of like my journey, my year of introspection that a lot of us had during the first year of the pandemic, and the people that I worked with during that year. The second season is interviews with other introvert language learners. And that season was kind of very pivotal for me because when I was interviewing people, I started thinking, okay, I think there's something more. And that's when I decided to go for my autism assessment, got diagnosed, when I was like releasing season 3. So I was like, crap, how much of this information that I was telling people is actually because of my autism? Like, I don't know. Is this introversion? Is it autism? And even when I started the podcast, I realized how difficult it is to talk about introversion. And I'm sure we'll talk about this in a few minutes. But human beings were so complex to begin with that, you know, introversion, extroversion is a spectrum. And there's so many things that can influence even how introverted or extroverted you feel in a particular day. You know, how much sleep did you get? How well did you eat? What phase of life are you in? How are your hormones? Like so many different things. And that's part of why I wanted to interview different teachers or different learners. Season 3 is with teachers and other language educators. And then season 4 is focused more on mental health. These things that through the recording of the other seasons, I realized are so important and they never teach you formally in a classroom. They're super important to continue with your language, and especially once you've reached proficiency in it, to maintain it. Things like dealing with failure, like we talked about with you,
Yeah.
dealing with stress, good or bad stress, having a language parent, and all different kinds of things that are super important. And so I started the podcast to begin with because I was just tired of being told I needed to talk more, feeling like I needed to change myself, feeling like I tried all these things and they didn't work. Well, they didn't work because the environment wasn't right for me to learn in and to be successful in. And it's something that I think is getting a little bit more attention, but still, I think we have a long way to go in terms of thinking about introversion and extroversion in the language learning classroom or even one-on-one when you're an adult and learning independently. So
Great. And the maybe just to start with, maybe we was to define introverted and extroverted, because I know many people, myself included, would tie in shyness as well as some. And you said quiet, for instance. You know, what does it actually mean, and what kind of people do you see exhibit either introvertedness or extrovertedness, and what kind of learning environment in, let's say, in the school, why is that so bad for one group but not the other?
so you're right in that there are words that are thrown around all the time. And it goes back to stereotypes a lot of times, which is another one of the reasons why I started my podcast. Um, I have a shirt that I absolutely love, but I'm kind of conflicted about it. It's it says proudly antisocial member of the introverted book club. And I love everything about it except for the word antisocial because I take it as an inside joke. But at the same time, lots of times introverted does mean for people antisocial, which makes no sense because like you're anti-war, you're actively against war. You're anti, I don't know, leaf blowers. You actively hate leaf blowers. There's a leaf blower going on outside my apartment building right now. But like, and so antisocial, like you're actively like against some kind of social something, right? Whereas when you're a normal human being, taking your time away because you need to recharge your batteries, that's like one of the most pro-social behaviors you can do,
Mm,
you know? Because if you are at the end of your battery and you force yourself to be with people because that's the sociable thing to do, that's actually a really mean thing to do because you're going to get cranky. People are going to notice. It's not going to be pretty.
yeah.
So, and you hear things all the time, like people will say, like, she was quiet, but she was nice. You like never hear people say she was loud, but she was nice. So like she
Right.
was quiet, but she was nice, you know? Or you'll hear people say, like, oh, I used to be introverted, but then I grew out of it.
Oh,
No, you
really?
did not. No, you did not. So basically, introverted and extroverted, a lot of people describe it as introverts like get energy from being alone and extroverts get energy from being with people. I kind of like that. I kind of don't because everyone gets energy from being around the right people.
Right.
Introverts typically have a lower social battery. So I like to think of it as sort of like an older versus a newer iPhone. Neither one is better or worse. They're just different. One's just newer. So like introverts, think of them as kind of like the old iPhone battery. Like it just drains a lot quicker and they need long to recharge. Extroverts, they need, less time alone. They can, they need less time to recharge. Another way someone else said it was, think of it as having coins. That an introvert will wake up and have 20 coins in their bank, because they just rested, they were alone, they recharged. And every interaction that they have with someone, especially if it's an interaction that wears them out, like someone annoying or just, someone high energy, it takes a coin away. So they're going to go to bed with less coins than they woke up with. Whereas an extrovert, they're going to wake up with their bank empty. And then each interaction they have, of course, if it's, someone that wears out their energy, it's different. But each interaction, at least positive, that they have is going to add a coin to their bank. So they're going to go to bed with more coins than they woke up with. So it's just different, right? And so introverts, that's the way I like to look at it. They typically drain faster from social interaction. Sometimes they need less of it, and they need more time alone. And so it's not an easy thing to talk about because, lots of times it depends on even the phase of life you're in. If you're in the sandwich years, you're taking care of your parents and your kids, you may have naturally less energy for social interactions. When you're a kid and you have less responsibilities, you may have more energy for social interactions. Also, when social interactions are so much easier, I mean, you can just be like, hey, I'm Susie. I like rocks. You want to see my rock collection? You don't do that as an adult, right? You can be
Maybe we
friends for a
should.
day. Yeah, you can be friends for the day at the park and, then you can go home. And as an adult, it's a lot harder, right? And so if, you're a woman who's menstruating, it depends on where you are in your cycle. Sometimes you feel more introverted, more extroverted. And again, it depends on how well you take care of yourself also, because that also in turn affects your hormones. So there's so many different things that can affect it. And it's more of a spectrum to begin with. So you have people
Right.
who are just naturally more on the introverted end of things, more on the naturally on the extrovert end of things. And so it's like, I like to think of it as you're sort of more like fixed on one end or the other, but you can move a little bit depending on the different circumstances. Each of those things are definitely not the same thing as shy or even socially anxious.
Right.
Those things can be kind of like hard to tease apart sometimes. Shy is some people define shyness as a type of social anxiety, which is basically where you're afraid of like someone else's reaction to you. You feel inhibited. You feel like you don't want to talk, you don't want to say something because you don't know how the other person's going to react. So you can be introverted or extroverted and be shy or socially anxious. And I think I always recommend to people the book Quiet by Susan Cain because she does a much better job of explaining the differences in all these things that than I do. But I think, just rough explanation, those are kind of the differences.
Good start. And how does that kind of visualize for learners, let's say, either in school or as independent learners? What kind of habits or traits do they exhibit, depending on where on the spectrum they kind of find themselves?
Lots of times with introverts, you find them needing more time to think and consider. And so, for example, when I was going through the certificate program for teaching English to speakers of other languages, we had a module on designing activities for more introverted students, which for me was, it's like how you just sort of go through an environment that doesn't work for you, but you assume that you're the problem until you realize that like, no, there are solutions. I was in the problem, the environment was. So that was kind of like my aha moment with this. Basically, the teacher or the director told us that, you know, the way the language learning classroom is designed is so ingrained because in the West, a lot of the times the extrovert is the ideal and that flows into the language learning classroom. It's basically like I always hated the game Around the World. I don't know if y'all play that,
Where you
but
throw a thing and you have to say the next word or something?
no, it's a game where, for example, me and Bob will, Bob, I'll be sitting down and Bob will be standing beside me, right? The teacher will ask a question, and whichever one of us answers it first will get to move on to the next desk. So like if I answer first, I get up from my desk, Bob sits at my desk, and I go to the next desk. And then it's like me and Susie, and whoever answers first gets to move first. I hated that game. I always knew the answer. Well, not always, but lots of times I knew the answer, but I was like never the first one because I need time to think. I need time to process. And so that's how so many activities are. And one of the funniest things is I would tell people to time someone. The next time you hear someone say, I'll give you a minute, time them. Okay. Because for most, not most people, but for a lot of people, it takes only 4 seconds of silence for them to get uncomfortable. I need
Really?
4 seconds minimum to process what you said and then more to come up with a response, right?
Mm,
And so, like the last two times I've timed someone, the first time someone gave them 4 seconds. The second time they gave them 13 seconds. Okay. But it's so funny. We're like, I'll give you a minute or I'll give you a couple of minutes. And they give you 13 seconds. And it's like, no. But that's how so many activities are because the idea is if you don't answer right away, you don't know, you weren't paying attention, you don't care. And that's not it at all. And
right.
so activities that this teacher mentioned, for example, were like you have students write down the answer, and then you give them like a fly swatter or something. And once they've written it down, their answer, they raise the fly swatter. And then once everyone has their fly swatter or stick or whatever you give them raised, then you call on someone. Or the one that I liked best that was like really fun is you have a stuffed animal like my angry Viking. Um, and you like throw it, you ask a question and you throw it to a student. And the student holds it in their hand and they answer. And then they throw it to someone else. And that someone else has to answer and it keeps going. So that way the students don't feel like all the attention is on them because the one thing I hate is attention. I do not want to be
Right.
in the center of the room. I don't want everyone looking at me. I cannot think when people are looking at me. And so when people are throwing around their stuffed animal, that's like taking the attention away from them. It takes the pressure off of them. And so it's designing all these sort of activities. And lots of times I think teachers don't even understand. And so, like I was telling you, Alistair Roy, random guy teaching English in Spain, was talking about in a guest blog he did about all these activities, right? That he started doing. And he was even talking about the design of the classroom. Like you have all the chairs facing each other. No, no, thank you. Or like you have all this group work. No, it's like there needs to be some sort of balance. And so he was really shocked because he was like, I'm an introvert too. How did I not pick up on all of these things? And so it's not about, switching everything to be introvert friendly. It's about providing that balance because typically in the language learning classroom, it's the extrovert who's almost always in their comfort zone and the introvert who's almost always outside of their comfort zone.
Mm,
And so providing a little bit more of that balance.
because
And so
they
then,
value participation. That's
yeah,
part of the grade usually.
right. And so, but the introvert like can't, or the introvert's participation is not recognized. Like another person who caused me to create the podcast is Diego Ojeda, who gave a speech one time about how we need to amplify the definition of participation in the language learning classroom because introverted students are typically the ones who come to class on time or early. They're prepared, they have their homework done, they may have done all their homework already, who knows. Um, they're helping out their classmates, they love the subject, and yet they don't get that recognition because that's not worked into the participation grade. And so I
Right.
was like also so excited when I got to interview him for the podcast. I was like, dude, you are like the reason why I started this podcast. It was really cool to do that. And so I think, all of these dynamics that are favored towards extroverts add into this feeling when you're constantly getting these messages all day, every day, that you're doing something wrong. And so that really affects your self-esteem, that affects your confidence, that affects your willingness to do and to move forward. And so I think that is, something that deserves a lot of attention in schools. But then also when you grow up and you're more independent, there's all these speaking events that you go to, and like
Mm.
it's so nerve-wracking. Like I don't know also if you've seen this meme, but there's a meme that's like in the middle, it's like someone's calendar, their day, and it's like in the middle, it's phone call, like a 30-minute phone call. They have that blocked off. They have their whole morning blocked off that
Mm.
says preparing for phone call, and their entire afternoon blocked off that says recovering from phone call. It's like phone calls are so like dysregulating. They're so just, oh, I hate them. Not all introverts hate them, but it's like when you focus so much on speaking, not only is that just one of
Mm.
the competencies, but also it's like it's debilitating, especially if you're studying multiple languages, to go to these speaking events that you don't know who these people are, how long you're going to talk for, what you're going to
Mm.
talk about, and it's just so unnatural to how you converse and socialize to begin with, right? And so I just really I wanted to create a space to showcase people who are doing things differently, right? Like Jonathan Huggins, who you have, who does these voice recordings, right? And it's all
Yeah.
just voice recordings, practicing speaking. Bronte, who does things differently. And I think in terms of doing things independently, like they have so much good advice, or even finding teachers like season 3, I interviewed people who all have experience in empathy working with quieter students,
Mm.
right? I think it's really important. Molly Gadara in season 4, she talks about the importance of having a language parent, someone who's going to support you and work with you, because if you do want to, and encourage you, because if you do want to focus on speaking, I even thought about it a lot. Like, how did I learn English, right? Like it was pretty much one-on-one conversations, quieter people, chill environments. So why am I pushing myself to do something different in these other
Mm.
languages, right?
And you think a lot of the introverted learners from, let's say, high school or before high school, they might lose interest or become disillusioned with language classes, even though they might really like the subject or and languages in general. So when they become adults, they're almost scarred and traumatized by those experiences. So they might not even, if they are
Right.
looking into languages, they're not excited about it, they're not happy about it, and then maybe they feel like they need to learn in a more extroverted way, to
Yeah,
be
and
successful.
definitely. And I think that leads into something else, which is really important that also nobody talks about. It's I know lots of people make fun of people in the US for speaking English and only English, which by the way, there's nothing wrong with being monolingual. But I think there are a lot of people who love other languages, but we have such strong narratives here in the US that include, like, if this language isn't part of your heritage, why are you speaking it? You
Mm.
know? Um, and so like for me, as I was telling you before, I've been speaking Spanish for 30 years. Okay. 30 years. But my face is really loud. And so it's kind of like you have this environment in the US where um you have these languages that are taught as just another subject. So why should students care? And then you have this strong narrative that says, if this language isn't a part of your history, you don't need to speak it.
Mm.
So why are students going to learn it? Like that's a huge problem to begin with. But then you have the students who love it and who care about it and who go out of school learning it. But then the languaging has been going great. But then the peopling, not so much.
Right.
You have awkward interactions with people, right? Who are like constantly wanting you to essentially explain your existence, whether it's out of curiosity or not. It's really exhausting to deal with that.
Yeah.
And it's something that even I recently read Jhumpa Lahiri's book, In Other Words, which I think is like super important for everyone to learn, especially if you've mastered a language, right? And are trying to learn it. It can be really difficult if you're introverted. You're just like, I don't know how to deal with people to begin with, right?
Right.
She has a chapter about, so basically, she's from the US. English was her dominant language, but she discovered Italian and she loved it. And by the time she wrote this book, she had been learning Italian for 20 years. And she would go to a store in Italy and the employee would just automatically speak to her in English. It's like, I look at you, I see you're not Italian, I'm gonna speak to you in English. And that just like, it hurts so bad. She's like, I love this language, but like there's nothing I can ever do to make people just look at me and just speak to me in Italian. But then her husband looks like he could be Italian. So
Mm.
like she would be in this store speaking to him in full sentences in Italian. He would respond back like, yeah, sure, looks good, okay. And so when she went to pay, the employee would be like, your husband's Italian, isn't he? And she's like, I am the one who's been studying Italian for 20 years. I'm the one who loves Italian. My
Yeah.
husband learned it because he has to. He says monosyllables and people assume he's Italian.
Right.
Right. And so I mean it's that sort of thing too that I think people they don't talk about enough.
Yeah. It's not easy. But what do you think, maybe from a personal perspective, what do you think introverted language learners can do to maybe counter some of those systems and become a little bit more successful or a lot more successful, maybe in school or in an institution or as an independent language learner?
In school, it's really tough, right? Because in school, you are
It's quite rigid.
really still observing a lot. You don't know all that much. So I really feel like in school, it's a lot more the responsibility of like parents or adults in their lives, teachers, people like school administrators to start to create change in those areas. Um, and one of the things also that I would really advocate for is like teaching students like how to interact in like cross-cultural situations, because I think lots of times we do teach the culture but we don't teach how to interact in
Right.
those situations, right? As far as independent language learners, I think one of the things is this is why I advocate so much for therapy and for mental health, because this whole idea of intersectionality, taking all the parts of you into consideration, are really important. And especially as we've touched on in season 4, these mental aspects of learning and using a language are so important, of resilience, of dealing with failure, of dealing with stress, of dealing with your emotions, of dealing with, any sort of neurodivergence or just, feeling totally different out of place,
It's a
right?
million things, right? Like
A
any
million
learner is
things.
different and doesn't have to be introverted versus extroverted. It could
Hmm.
be like shy, we talked about. Or maybe you just have some kind of brain block against grammar for some reason, and you
Right.
just can't get any of the grammar right, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah. And so I say therapy is super important. I say also finding your people. You know, when I went to Sicily this past summer, Sicily and then Denmark, but I focused more on Sicily because of the language aspect. I went for a language retreat. And it was during these experiences that I realized like there was nothing wrong with me. I had just been putting myself in the wrong environments and around the wrong people. And it's a world of difference when you put yourself in the right situations and with the right people, it changes everything. And it's something that as an adult, you do have a lot more agency. I think that therapy is very important in building that mental strength. And once you have that mental strength, you can put up these boundaries and say, you know what, I too have the choice to decide who I'm going to speak to in this language. Because if someone doesn't make you feel good and you feel like you're not making progress or you're regressing, stop talking to them, go somewhere else, or
Right.
even, find what lights you up. Like for me, with all the issues I've had with Spanish, I found a group that reads Asian literature in Spanish. That's my main way of, living in the language. And so if you're someone who likes to read more, focus on that, and focus on socializing in a way that's most natural to you. Don't necessarily push yourself to do anything different. I think one of the best things about social media is that we can find people who are like us. So I've tried to go and find introverted people, autistic people in Latin America, in Italy, to say, okay, how do they live, how do they interact, how do they do things, right? To sort of find that and build that sort of community, because I'm never going to act like, a Mexican neurotypical person. Never. It's not going to happen. I might succeed for like 30 minutes and then I'll be exhausted and need to hibernate for 10 years. So, it's all about finding your people. I think it's one of the absolute most important things.
And how much about, you said pushing, how much of it, how much of success is constantly pushing your boundaries, balancing, also respecting your kind of limitations and boundaries and, your personality basically, because I guess pushing is usually good, but how do I know the difference between being uncomfortable because I'm pushing myself or being uncomfortable because it's not a natural situation for me?
A really hard one. And the more I think about it, the more I'm just like, I don't know that there is a right answer, because I saw this meme the other day that was something about like, don't tell me to go out of my comfort zone because I live outside of my comfort zone. And
Right.
so it's kind of like having a lot of compassion on yourself. I know one thing that I used to do would be to ask myself when I was feeling nervous, I would sort of sit with that for a second and say, okay, is this, am I feeling this way because my social battery is naturally going down
Mm,
and I need to honor that? Or am I scared of what this person's going to say? And can I like try to push past that? So I also sort of see it as like a very situational thing.
sure.
Um, and that's again where I think the therapy helps, the language coaching helps, because these are things that you can talk with about this person and sort of say, okay, like, is this a moment when I should push myself or not? And I think overall, it's one of the things that I've had to accept. Like, I'm never going to be a super chatterbox. I'm never going to socialize with a bunch of people. I'm never going to be able to go to all the events and do all the things, And so I think I try to set goals for myself based on what I know, like I would just like naturally do. Like, let's say I go to a language conference, okay? I'm going to naturally not want to talk to like anybody, but
Yeah.
let me talk to one person. Okay. And so then if I talk to just one person, dude, good, I've done it. But then if I talk to two, oh man, that's amazing, you know? But also if I talk to no people, okay. And how did I feel after that? I think that's
Mm,
one of the things that's really hard, because you were saying, like you sometimes you feel nervous. I think nervousness, though, I think all these things are things we need to sort of rethink, because these are things that sort of push us to do things. These are things that let us know this is important to me, this matters to me.
yeah.
It's just a messenger. It's just telling us something, right? It's not bad. Um, but it's really hard to know like how we're gonna feel after.
Right.
We can't just go through it and then see how we feel after and then go back and rewind if we hated it. We can't do that. And so that's why I say, I think a lot of the self-compassion and just taking it on a case by case basis, working on your mental health, making sure that's in place, and I think all of that will really help.
Yeah. Basically, I think that's exactly what I would say. Patience, kindness, be because we can be very hard on ourselves, regardless of our
Hmm.
personalities or kind of levels of introvertedness. It's so easy to punish yourself for, and the comparison, of course, is hasn't has never been easier now with social media or YouTube, and typically the people you see making those videos are of a certain, let's say, personality, and that might not be your personality. So when you try to do what they do and you find a lot of friction, a lot of pain, the natural kind of comment might be, "Oh, I'm just useless," and you just start punishing yourself for. When in reality, it's like you said, it's like just not doing it your way or trying to find your people or your situations. So I think that's really important, but hard. It's very difficult, and I think that's why having someone to talk to about it, whether a professional or friend or a coach, like you said, I think it's almost essential, because otherwise you just end up cooking in your own negative,
Hmm.
thoughts. And I mean, it could be neutral thoughts as well, but if you just keep talking to yourself, you're going to go mad about it, I think, at some point.
Hmm.
just
Definitely. Yeah.
You just want to get a little bit of an outlet. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and having sharing these like different perspectives that are very unique from what we've heard in different years and different presentations. We've just got a few minutes left, and we had there was an interesting question that came up during the pre-chat where we had this, what's the point of learning a language if you're not going to speak it? And I thought I'd just let you take that on as a final thing here today, because I think, of course, it's a facetious question, but I think there might be people out there thinking this, whether they are introverted or not. They might be like, is it even worth learning a language if you're never going to feel comfortable actually speaking it, or you're not going to speak to learn it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really funny for me now that I've done all this thinking and talking about introversion. But one of the people that I worked with during my year of introspection was Bronte Singleton. And I asked her in a coaching call, I was like, how often do you talk with people? She was like, never. I was like, what? This is amazing. And she would say that, of course she has, some people from time to time, but, her main way of output with other people was typically messages, you know? And I just thought that was like so amazing. And so she talks a lot about, learning languages to play video games, to watch movies, to read books. And for me, it's something that is makes a lot of sense also because I know in our chat with you, you were talking about learning Russian and like how many Russians have you met? It's like for me learning Italian, how many Italians have I met? How often will I be able to go to Italy, right? Not that often, but how many books can I read? Especially
Mm.
now with the ebooks, a lot. And so it's kind of funny to me anymore when people ask that question seriously, not to make fun of them at all, but there's so many reasons. And I think I don't know if it was you or someone else or a bunch of people who have said, to really grasp a language, you need to speak it. I think that's true. I'm not going to argue with that. I think, if you want to really be fully well-rounded in a language, like, yes, you need to have all the competencies there. But especially if you're learning a language for pleasure, you're learning it for fun. If it's not fun for you to talk to people, why are you forcing yourself to do it? This is not fun anymore. If you want to do these other things, do the other things. It's okay.
Yeah, and the languages are such a treasure trove of resources and activities. You mentioned books or videos or music, whatever, but it's also just a type of learning that is just in some ways just to broaden your horizons and learn more about other cultures. And maybe if it's reading the news in the original language, so it doesn't get filtered by your country's media, even that
Mhm.
is tremendously valuable. And there's some, to me, it's always just a good habit or a good pursuit just to learn more, whether there's an actual, let's say, speaking opportunity. Yeah, I don't think that matters very much at all. Of course, a lot of people have that as the original goal. They're like, oh, I want to go to France and speak to people, and that's great. But there's really a lot you can do without the speaking as well. So I don't think that should be a requirement at all for people. Um, Definitely look out into different activities, different rewards,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
they'll
there's
give
so
you a
much
lot.
there.
Fantastic. Well, Martha, yeah, it's a great pleasure. And you just meant to mention Bronte. I just want to highlight her talk as well, which is Quietly Fluent, The Introvert's Guide to Consistent Progress Without Burnout. So, it's really interesting to see how the topics are developing over the years, because I don't think we've had topics on introverted versus out extroverted at all before. Maybe we've mentioned it in passing, but do you think that this is kind of like a development in the world where we're starting to people are starting to be allowed to be different in a way? I know that sounds kind of, you know,
No, I mean, I think so, and I hope so because, I've seen so much more people talking about intersectionality because there's so many things that influence how I navigate the world as, an introverted,
yeah,
autistic woman from the US, white, all these different things that I think have been ignored for a long time because people have just seen languages as words. you know.
Yeah.
And I recently saw even stories, if anyone has Instagram and wants to follow El Teachercito on Instagram, he talks about things like this a lot. And it's really cool, I think, to see it being talked about more.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's great to see the development in the materials of how to learn language. Where for the past 10 years, I've done a podcast on that. Maybe in the beginning we were talking a lot about strategies and tactics, but they were kind of conformed to this traditional sense of maybe even school learning. And so over time, it's developed into this. Okay, well, it's much more important to figure out who the learner is than what the materials are going to be because if you give the wrong materials to the right learner, they might never get anywhere. It's kind of like having a good teacher. Some teachers are
Right.
just going to make you hate the subject forever, and some teachers are going to make you love it no matter what it is. So yeah, I'm really chuffed about that as well, and it's good to see. And hopefully we can kind of help support a little movement on just in general, not just language learning, but really give people more space to be who they are and be happy about it instead of trying to mimic what you see other people live like, whether that's on social media or in movies or whatever. Yeah, I think that's a really a big positive for society.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, thank you. And if anyone wants to know more, wants to listen to the podcast, we've mentioned it a few times. Can you just let people know where to find it and find you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, so the podcast, like I said, it's called I'm Learning. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, pretty much everywhere.
Everywhere.
And I am on Instagram as that's SHHH underscore I'm learning. And that's really the only reason I have Instagram anymore is to connect with other language people. So you can definitely find me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Martha, and I look forward to you talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, thanks.